I am Harper, 26 years old, and I woke up alone in the ICU with tubes running from every part of my body. The pain was excruciating, but the silence was worse. I heard the doctor whisper to the nurse, "Tonight might be her last." With trembling fingers, I texted my parents. Mom replied, "Sorry, honey, we can't come tonight. Your brother's celebration party is more important." That moment lying there, fighting for my life, I realized some wounds cut deeper than any physical trauma. If you have ever felt abandoned by those who should love you most, leave a comment below. My story will show you that sometimes the deepest hurts open the most beautiful doors. Growing up in a middle-class home in a small Pennsylvania town, I always knew my place in the family hierarchy. Second, always second. My younger brother Noah was the golden child, the boy wonder who excelled at everything he touched. Football trophies lined his shelves. Academic awards plastered his walls. My parents, Richard and Eleanor, structured their entire lives around his schedule, his achievements, his existence. "Noah has a game tonight," Mom would say, already grabbing her keys and the special cushion she brought to every event. Dad would wear his custom jacket with "Proud Father of Number 7" emblazoned across the back. They never missed a single game competition or school event of his, not one. Meanwhile, I developed a passion for art early on. My watercolors won regional competitions, my designs were selected for local exhibitions, but those moments played out differently. "Harper, we can drop you off at your art show, but we need to leave right after. Noah has practice at 7. Dad would explain, checking his watch even before we arrived. I learned to navigate these exhibitions alone, shaking hands with judges and accepting certificates while scanning the crowd for faces that were never there. I smiled through the hollow congratulations from other parents who would ask, "Couldn't your folks make it tonight?" My 16th birthday remains particularly vivid in my memory. I had planned it for months, a small gathering at our local pizza place with a few friends, nothing extravagant, just some pizza cake and maybe a movie after. The day before, Noah announced he had a last-minute scrimmage game. "We have to reschedule your dinner, Harper," Mom said without looking up from the calendar. "This is important for Noah's college prospects." "But I already invited everyone," I protested. "They'll understand. Family comes first," Dad chimed in, though his definition of family priorities had always been crystal clear. I celebrated my 16th birthday with two friends who could still make the changed date. My parents forgot to order a cake, and when they finally came home that night, flushed with excitement over Noah's performance, they didn't even ask how my evening went. The strange part was my relationship with Noah himself. He wasn't malicious, just accustomed to the world revolving around him. Why wouldn't he be? Every message he received from our parents reinforced his centrality in our family universe. "Harper, can you help your brother with his science project? You know he has a game this weekend." "Harper, we need to be quiet. Noah needs his rest before the tournament." "Harper, can you drive Noah to his friend's house? We promised we'd take him, but we need to prepare for his celebration dinner." He grew accustomed to my assistance, my sacrifice, my invisibility. Sometimes he would notice and offer a casual "thanks, sis," but most times he simply accepted it as his due. Our house itself told the story of our family's priorities. The living room showcased Noah's trophies. The hallway displayed Noah's professional sports photos. The refrigerator held Noah's schedules, Noah's achievements, Noah's needs. Evidence of my existence was limited to a single family photo taken at a cousin's wedding and a small corner in the den where I was permitted to keep my art supplies. I became fiercely independent out of necessity. I learned to drive early so I could take myself to art classes. I worked part-time jobs to pay for supplies my parents deemed unnecessary expenses. I maintained straight A's without any parental oversight, knowing that academic excellence was my ticket to freedom. "You're so responsible," teachers would comment, mistaking my survival mechanisms for maturity. While other teenagers rebelled, I perfected invisibility. I came home on time. I did my chores without being asked. I never created problems because I knew instinctively that problems would further diminish the small space I occupied in my parents' awareness. When college acceptance letters arrived, I kept them to myself for weeks. Harvard, Yale, and Columbia all offered substantial scholarships based on my portfolio and academic record. When I finally shared the news, my parents' response was predictable. "That's nice, Harper," Mom said before turning to Noah, who was only a freshman in high school. "Coach thinks Noah might get recruited by Division I schools if he keeps improving." I chose Columbia not just for its prestigious art program, but for its location. New York represented possibility, anonymity, and most importantly, distance. The day I left home, my parents drove me to the bus station rather than taking me to campus like most families. Noah had a preseason training camp that same weekend. "Call when you get there," Dad said, already checking the time. I boarded the bus with 2 suitcases containing everything I valued, looking back only once to see them already driving away late for Noah's next triumph. New York embraced me like family never had. The city's constant motion, its indifference to who you were versus what you could create, felt like freedom. I thrived at Columbia, double majoring in graphic design and marketing. My professors recognized my talent, mentored me, and connected me with internship opportunities that my classmates envied. By my junior year, I secured a position at a boutique advertising agency in Manhattan, working part-time during school and full-time during breaks. After graduation, they offered me a permanent role with a salary that allowed me to afford a tiny but charming studio apartment in Brooklyn. "This place is so you," Maya said the first time she visited. Maya was my college roommate turned best friend, a vibrant journalism major who approached life with the same fearless energy she applied to investigative reporting. My apartment became my sanctuary, just 400 square feet, but every inch reflected me. Colorful textiles I had collected from street fairs, framed prints of my own design work, plants thriving on every available surface, a small desk by the window where I could watch the Brooklyn streetscape while working on freelance projects. Maya and Daniel became my chosen family. Daniel, whom I met through a design collaboration at work, quickly became one of my closest friends. The three of us established traditions that sustained me through the isolation of family holidays. Friendsgiving rather than Thanksgiving. Christmas Eve movie marathons. New Year's Day brunches, where we set intentions for the coming year. Meanwhile, communication with my actual family dwindled to occasional formalities. Mom would call sometimes, but our conversations followed a predictable pattern. "How are you, Harper?" "I'm good, Mom. I just finished a big campaign for a national clothing brand. My design is going to be on billboards in Times Square next month." "That's nice, honey. Did I tell you Noah made the dean's list again? The football coach says he might be team captain next year." I continued trying. I sent thoughtful birthday gifts. I called on holidays. I even made the 6-hour bus trip home for Christmas most years, though these visits left me emotionally drained rather than refreshed. Last Christmas was particularly difficult. I saved for months to afford the trip home, plus gifts for everyone. I bought Dad a limited edition book from a photographer he admired. For Mom, I found a handcrafted scarf from her favorite designer. For Noah, concert tickets to a band he had mentioned liking. The 3 days I spent at home, I might as well have been invisible. Conversations centered entirely around Noah's upcoming graduation and job prospects. When I tried to share stories about my promotion at work, Mom nodded distractedly before interrupting to ask if I'd seen Noah's new car. Opening gifts on Christmas morning, my presents to them were acknowledged with polite thanks before being set aside. I received a generic gift card and a sweater in a size I hadn't worn since high school. "I can exchange it if it doesn't fit," Mom said, when she noticed my expression, though she had never once visited me in New York or seen my adult life. I returned to Brooklyn feeling hollowed out, questioning why I continued to invest in relationships that offered so little in return. Yet I kept trying, telling myself that family was family, that they loved me in their way, that I shouldn't expect more than they could give. Maya confronted me after that visit. "Harper, this isn't healthy. They take and never give back. You need to set some boundaries. Daniel agreed. You don't have to cut them off, but maybe protect yourself a little more. Stop expecting them to suddenly become the parents you deserved. I knew they were right, but old habits die hard. I continued sending birthday cards, continued making brief calls, continued the pattern established over 2 decades. That spring, I received a major promotion at work. After leading a campaign that increased our clients' revenue by 30%, I was named Associate Creative Director, bypassing several more senior designers. When I called to share the news, Mom sounded distracted. That's your job, right? The drawing thing. Graphic design, Mom. Yes, it's a really big promotion. I'll be managing a team now, and the salary increase is substantial. That's nice, honey. Oh, did I tell you Noah has an interview for a medical school internship next week? It's very competitive, only accepts 12 students each year. I ended the call shortly after sitting in my apartment surrounded by the life I had built entirely on my own, wondering why I still craved approval from people who had never truly seen me. The accident happened on a Tuesday evening in late September. I was cycling home from work after staying late to finish a client presentation. The streets were busy with the usual New York rush hour traffic, but I had made this commute hundreds of times before. I knew every pothole, every tricky intersection, every timing of the lights. At the intersection of Atlantic and 3rd, the traffic light turned green. I pushed off, moving into the bike lane. I never saw the delivery truck that ran the red light from the cross street. The driver later said he was checking his GPS and didn't notice the signal change. The impact was immediate and devastating. I remember a flash of headlights, the screech of brakes coming too late, and then a sensation of flying through the air. The landing was worse, my body connecting with asphalt at a speed that human flesh was never designed to withstand. Pain exploded everywhere at once, so intense that it transcended normal sensory experience. I heard someone screaming before realizing it was me. Bystanders gathered around, their faces swimming in and out of focus as my consciousness wavered. "Don't move her," someone said. "I've called 911, another voice announced. "Stay with us, honey," an older woman urged, holding my hand. The ambulance arrived quickly, its sirens cutting through my fading awareness. The paramedics worked efficiently, stabilizing my neck, assessing injuries, starting an IV line. "Multiple traumas," I heard one say. "Possible internal bleeding." "BP dropping," another responded. The ride to the hospital passed in fragments of sensation and sound, the jolt of the stretcher being lifted, the paramedic constantly checking my vitals, the radio communications with the emergency room using medical terminology I couldn't fully comprehend in my state. I woke up in the hospital, an unknown time later, surrounded by beeping machines and the antiseptic smell that permeates all medical facilities. The pain was still there, but muted now, managed by what I would later learn was a significant cocktail of medications. A doctor stood at the foot of my bed reviewing a chart. When she noticed my open eyes, she approached. "Harper, I'm Dr. Morris. You're at Brooklyn Methodist Hospital. You were in a serious accident. Do you understand me?" I tried to nod, but discovered my neck was immobilized. I managed a weak yes. "You have multiple injuries, a severe concussion, 3 broken ribs, a fractured femur, internal bleeding that we've managed to control for now. Your spleen was damaged and required surgical repair." She continued listing injuries and treatments, but the details blurred together. I gathered enough to understand that I had been in surgery for several hours and that my condition, while stabilized, remained serious. "Is there someone we should call for you?" she asked. I provided Maya's number first, then Daniel's. As an afterthought, I added my parents' contact information, though without much expectation. Maya and Daniel arrived within the hour, their faces drawn with worry. Maya immediately took my hand, careful to avoid disturbing the IV line. "You scared us, Harper," she said, her voice catching. "The hospital called us both." Daniel stood at the foot of the bed. "We've got you. Whatever you need, we're here." Their presence brought the first sense of safety I'd felt since waking. They took turns sitting with me through that first night, advocating with nurses, helping me sip water through a straw, and providing updates to my workplace. "Did you call my parents?" I asked Maya the next morning. "Yes, right after the hospital called us. I spoke to your mom. She said they would catch the first flight out." I felt a flicker of surprise followed by a tentative hope. Perhaps a life-threatening emergency would be enough to finally prioritize me. Dr. Morris returned later that day with concerning news. My brain scan showed increasing pressure and the internal bleeding, while slowed, hadn't completely stopped. My condition was deteriorating. "We need to move you to the ICU for closer monitoring," she explained. "We may need to perform additional surgery if things don't improve." As the orderlies prepared to transfer me, Maya stepped into the hallway to make another call. She returned looking uncomfortable. "Your mom called while you were getting your scan. They're delaying their trip. Something about Noah's medical school acceptance party tonight. They said they'll try to come tomorrow instead." The news landed like a physical blow. Even now, with doctors concerned about my survival, Noah's celebration took precedence. I closed my eyes, not wanting Maya to see the tears forming. By evening, my condition had worsened. The ICU room felt sterile and isolating, despite the constant presence of medical staff. Nurses came and went, checking monitors, adjusting medications, speaking in hushed tones just outside the door. Dr. Morris had become more than just my physician. In the way that sometimes happens in crisis, she had become my advocate and ally. She sat beside my bed after her rounds. "Your friends told me your parents haven't arrived yet," she said carefully. "They're busy," I replied, the words tasting bitter. "My brother had something important." Her expression shifted subtly, compassion mixing with something harder to define. "I see. Well, I've called them again myself. I explained that your condition is very serious." "Let me guess," I said, attempting a weak smile. "They'll be here tomorrow." Dr. Morris didn't confirm or deny, but her silence was answer enough. She patted my hand gently before leaving. That night, as pain broke through even the strong medications, I drifted between consciousness and delirious dreams. Maya and Daniel had been asked to leave as my condition deteriorated, though they fought to stay until hospital policy forced them out. A nurse named Sophia stayed by my side, her gentle efficiency a comfort in the sterile environment. "You're not alone," she assured me whenever I woke disoriented and frightened. "I'm right here with you." As midnight approached, Dr. Morris returned to my room, her face grave as she checked the latest test results. I heard her step outside the door, not quite closing behind her. Through the gap, I heard her voice tense and direct. "Mrs. Lawson, I need to be very clear. Your daughter's condition has worsened significantly. The bleeding has resumed and we're seeing dangerous pressure on her brain. We're preparing for emergency surgery, but I have to be honest with you. Tonight might be her last. You and your husband need to come now." The response from the other end was loud enough that I could hear it through the phone's speaker. "We understand it's serious, doctor, but we're at a very important celebration for our son right now. He's just been accepted to medical school and the dean of admissions is here. We can't possibly leave. We'll catch the first flight in the morning, I promise." In that moment, something inside me broke and reformed. A lifetime of hoping for their love, their attention, their presence collapsed into a singular realization. They would never come. Not when it mattered, not even when my life hung in the balance. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical urgency. Nurses rushed in and out of my room, additional equipment appeared, medical terms were exchanged in terse professional tones that couldn't quite mask the underlying concern. Intracranial pressure continuing to rise. New bleeding in the upper right quadrant. "Prep or 3, we need to go in now." Through it all, Sophia remained my anchor. She held my hand when fear overwhelmed me, explained procedures in simple terms I could understand through the fog of pain and medication, and most importantly, treated me like a person rather than just a collection of failing systems. "You're stronger than you know," she whispered as they prepared to take me to surgery. "Keep fighting." Dr. Morris appeared beside my bed, her surgical cap already on. Harper, we need to relieve the pressure on your brain and find the source of the new bleeding. I know you're scared, but this is necessary. Do you understand? I managed a small nod, the movement sending shards of pain through my skull. I've called your parents again, she added, her voice taking on an edge I hadn't heard before. I was very explicit about your condition. They're not coming, are they? I asked, already knowing the answer. Dr. Morris hesitated, her professional demeanor slipping for just a moment. They said they'll be here tomorrow morning. They're still at your brother's celebration. A strange calm settled over me, then the kind that comes only when you finally accept a painful truth you've been fighting for years. My entire life I had been hoping for a different family, different parents, a different place in their hearts. In the face of my potential death, they had made their priorities crystal clear. If I don't make it through this, I said, my voice steadier than I expected, don't let them pretend they were here. Don't let them rewrite this story. Dr. Morris's eyes softened with a mixture of sadness and respect. You're going to make it through this, Harper, and then you get to write your own story. Before they wheeled me to surgery, I asked Sophia for a favor. There's a notebook in my bag and a pen. Could you bring them to me? I need to write something. Sophia retrieved them quickly, holding the notebook steady as I struggled to write with an IV in my hand and my body damaged beyond recognition. The letter was messy words, occasionally sliding across the page as my strength wavered, but the message was clear. In that letter, I poured out 26 years of invisibility, the birthdays spent alone, the achievements uncelebrated, the constant message that Noah's smallest triumphs outweighed my greatest accomplishments. I described the pain of hearing them refuse to come, even as doctors warned them I might not survive the night. But I also wrote of forgiveness not for their sake, but for mine. I explained that I was releasing them from any obligation to me, freeing them to focus entirely on Noah without the inconvenience of a daughter they had never really wanted. I wished them happiness in the life they had chosen, the family of 3 they had always prioritized. I concluded by telling them that if I survived, I would be starting a new life without them in it. If I didn't, they should know that their absence in my final hours was simply the culmination of their absence throughout my life. Can you make sure they get this? I asked Sophia, folding the paper with trembling hands. Only if you know if things don't go well. Sophia took the letter, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I'll keep it safe, but you're going to give it to them yourself when you're ready. As they prepared to take me to surgery, Maya and Daniel somehow appeared at the doorway, having convinced someone to bend visiting rules. We're not supposed to be here, Maya admitted, rushing to my side. But we couldn't let you go into surgery without seeing you. Daniel stood behind her, his usually composed face showing naked fear. We'll be right here waiting when you get out. Their presence, their determination to be there, despite rules and obstacles, stood in stark contrast to my parents' absence. These friends who had no obligation to me had become more family than those who shared my blood. If I don't make it, I began. Don't, Maya interrupted fiercely. Don't even say it. But if I don't, I insisted, know that you two were the best family I could have asked for. The surgical team arrived, then ending our conversation as they prepared to move me. The last thing I remember before anesthesia took hold was Sophia whispering, Your real family is here, and they'll be waiting. The surgery lasted nearly 5 hours, a marathon procedure, as Dr. Morris and her team fought to save my life. They relieved the pressure on my brain, found and repaired the source of new bleeding, and stabilized my increasingly fragile systems. When I finally woke in the recovery room, the first thing I saw was Maya asleep in a chair beside me, her hand still holding mine, even in sleep. Daniel was curled uncomfortably in another chair, his jacket serving as a makeshift blanket. Dr. Morris appeared in my line of sight, looking exhausted but satisfied. Welcome back, she said quietly. You gave us quite a fight in there. I made it, I whispered, my throat raw from the breathing tube that had been removed. You did, and now, as promised, you get to write your own story. I remembered the letter then and the decision I had made while facing my mortality. It wasn't a choice made in anger or spite, but in clarity. For the first time, I saw my family situation with complete honesty, without the wishful thinking that had colored my perspective for years. My parents, I began. Still haven't arrived, Dr. Morris confirmed. They called this morning to say they're taking an afternoon flight. I nodded slightly, careful of the pain. I need to ask for your help with something. My parents and Noah finally arrived at the hospital around 4 in the afternoon, nearly 24 hours after Dr. Morris had told them I might not survive the night. By then, I was no longer in my original ICU room. With the help of Dr. Morris and Sophia, I had been moved to a private room under a pseudonym, a precaution that the hospital sometimes took for patients with safety concerns. In my original room, they left the letter on the empty bed. Maya, who had stationed herself in the waiting area near the ICU, later described to me what happened. My mother arrived first, still wearing a dress that suggested she had come directly from Noah's celebration, my father and brother following close behind. They approached the nurse's station asking for my room number. When they entered what they thought was my room, they found only an empty, freshly made bed with an envelope placed precisely in the center. My mother picked it up, recognizing my handwriting on the front. Maya, watching from the hallway, saw my mother's face drain of color as she read. My father took the letter from her trembling hands, his expression shifting from confusion to shock to something approaching grief. Noah stood apart, looking lost and uncomfortable in the sterile hospital environment. "Where is she?" my mother demanded of a passing nurse. "Where is my daughter?" The nurse, who had been briefed on the situation, responded with professional neutrality. "I'm not authorized to provide that information. You'll need to speak with Dr. Morris." My parents spent the next hour searching the hospital, growing increasingly frantic. Noah trailed behind them, his celebratory mood thoroughly diminished. They checked every waiting area, peered through the windows of rooms where they could, and repeatedly returned to the nurse's station with escalating demands. Finally, Dr. Morris agreed to meet with them in a small consultation room. Maya positioned herself nearby, not quite eavesdropping, but close enough to observe. "Your daughter survived emergency brain surgery last night," Dr. Morris informed them, her tone clinical and devoid of the warmth she showed to me. It was touch and go for several hours. "Where is she now?" my father asked. "We need to see her." "Harper has requested privacy at this time," Dr. Morris replied. "As her physician, I'm respecting her wishes." "We're her parents," my mother protested. "We have a right to see her." "Actually," Dr. Morris countered, "Harper is an adult. She has the right to determine who can visit her and access her medical information. She has not authorized me to share her location or condition with you." "This is ridiculous," my father sputtered. "We came as soon as we could." Dr. Morris raised an eyebrow. "According to my records, I personally informed you that your daughter might not survive the night. You chose to remain at a party rather than come to her side. That was your decision to make, but decisions have consequences." My mother began to cry, makeup streaking down her face. "We didn't think it was that serious. You doctors always exaggerate." "I assure you, Mrs. Lawson, I do not exaggerate when I tell a family their daughter might die," Dr. Morris replied evenly. "Harper suffered massive trauma, underwent 2 major surgeries, and experienced complications that nearly claimed her life. While you were celebrating, she was fighting for survival with only her friends beside her." Noah, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "This is my fault, isn't it, because of my party?" Dr. Morris's expression softened slightly. "The choices your parents made are their own, but perhaps this is an opportunity for all of you to reflect on family priorities." My parents left the consultation room looking shell-shocked. They tried calling my cell phone repeatedly, but it remained with my belongings in my new room. They sent text messages and emails that went unread. They even attempted to enlist Maya and Daniel's help, approaching them in the waiting area. "Please," my mother begged Maya, "just tell us if she's okay. Tell us where she is." Maya, loyal to her core, shook her head. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Lawson. Harper needs space right now. She'll reach out when she's ready." Noah approached Daniel separately. "I didn't know it was so serious." he said, genuine distress in his voice. "I would have made them come if I'd known." Daniel regarded him thoughtfully. Maybe this isn't just about one night or one decision. Maybe it's about a lifetime of decisions. Noah flinched as if struck. For perhaps the first time, he was confronting the reality of the family dynamic from the outside, seeing the preferential treatment he had received not as natural or deserved, but as fundamentally unfair. My family remained at the hospital for 3 days, becoming increasingly desperate in their attempts to find me. They spoke to administrators, threatened legal action, and finally resorted to checking every floor systematically. Hospital security was alerted to prevent them from disturbing patients, a precaution that clearly shocked my parents, who had never faced opposition to their demands before. From my hidden room, I received regular updates from Maya, Daniel, Dr. Morris, and Sophia. I felt a complex mixture of emotions, sadness for the relationship I had hoped for but never had, grief for the family I was choosing to leave behind, but also a growing sense of liberation. For the first time, I was prioritizing my own well-being over the hopeless quest for their approval. On the fourth day, defeated and demoralized, my parents returned to Pennsylvania. Noah remained behind for one more day, leaving a handwritten note with the hospital's patient advocate that was eventually delivered to me. In it, he apologized for his role in our family's dynamics and expressed genuine concern for my well-being. It was perhaps the first time he had ever considered my perspective. I read his note with tears in my eyes, recognizing that he, too, had been shaped by our parents' choices. The golden child role came with its own constraints and expectations. While I had been invisible, he had been hypervisible, defined entirely by his achievements rather than his humanity. As I began my long recovery process, I watched from a distance through social media as my disappearance affected my family. My mother posted plaintive messages, asking me to contact them. My father reached out to my college friends trying to locate me. Noah, most surprisingly, withdrew from the medical school he had been so proudly accepted to his posts, indicating a period of reflection and reevaluation. With Maya and Daniel's help, I navigated the complex administrative requirements of my hospitalization. They brought my laptop so I could work remotely when my strength permitted. They coordinated with my employer to arrange medical leave. They ensured my rent was paid and my plants were watered. Dr. Morris visited regularly, our relationship evolving from doctor-patient to something approaching friendship. During one visit, she shared her own experience with family estrangement. "Sometimes the hardest decisions are the healthiest ones," she told me. "Choosing yourself isn't selfish when the alternative is self-erasure." As my body slowly began to heal, I recognized that my spirit was healing too, freed from the constant disappointment of seeking validation from people unwilling or unable to provide it. After 3 weeks in the hospital, I was discharged to continue my recovery. Since my fourth-floor Brooklyn walk-up was impossible with my injuries, Maya insisted I move into her Williamsburg apartment. She cleared out her home office, transformed it into a bedroom, accessible without navigating stairs, and stocked her kitchen with the anti-inflammatory foods recommended by my doctors. "It's just temporary," I protested weakly as Daniel and Maya's boyfriend Alex helped settle me in. It's as long as you need," Maya countered, brooking no argument. "Besides, I like having you around." Physical recovery proved to be both more painful and more transformative than I had anticipated. 3 times weekly, I attended physical therapy sessions with a no-nonsense practitioner named Greta who pushed me to my limits and beyond. "Pain is information," she would say, as I struggled through exercises designed to rebuild atrophied muscles and restore range of motion to damaged joints. "Listen to it, respect it, but don't let it stop you." Some days, the physical pain was almost welcome, a tangible counterpoint to the emotional work I was simultaneously undertaking. 6 weeks after the accident, I began attending a support group for survivors of family trauma. The group met in a community center near Maya's apartment, a diverse collection of individuals united by the common thread of family relationships that had caused harm rather than healing. It was there I met Emma, a woman in her 30s who had cut contact with her emotionally abusive parents 5 years earlier. She became both friend and mentor, someone who understood the complicated grief of mourning a relationship while the people were still alive. It's like carrying a phantom limb, she explained during one of our coffee meetups after group. You keep reaching for something that isn't there anymore, feeling pain in a connection that's been severed. As my physical strength returned, I began contemplating next steps. My apartment lease was ending, and my job, while accommodating during my recovery, had shifted in my absence. The team I had led had been reassigned to another creative director, and while they assured me there was still a place for me, it was clear the landscape had changed. Maybe this is an opportunity, Daniel suggested during one of our regular dinner gatherings. You've always talked about wanting to experience life outside New York. The idea took root, growing stronger as I researched possibilities. Seattle emerged as a frontrunner, offering both a vibrant design scene and a literal and figurative distance from my past. You're really considering this, Maya observed, helping me browse apartment listings online. I need a fresh start, I admitted, somewhere without memories around every corner. 4 months after the accident, I submitted my resignation, accepted a position at a boutique design firm in Seattle, and began packing up the life I had built in New York. The decision felt both terrifying and right a leap into the unknown that paradoxically offered more security than remaining in familiar territory. Throughout this period, my family continued their attempts to contact me. Letters arrived at my old address, forwarded by the building super, who had my new mailing information. Emails accumulated in a folder I created specifically to contain them. Voicemails piled up unheard but saved. I wasn't ready to engage, to open myself to their explanations or apologies. The wound was still too raw, the clarity too new and precious to risk clouding with their perspectives. Noah proved the most persistent, reaching out to Maya and Daniel directly after finding their contact information through mutual acquaintances. He seems genuinely concerned, Maya reported after one such contact. He asked me to tell you he's deferred medical school for a year. He's working with some youth organization instead. I'm not ready, I told her, and she nodded, respecting my boundary without question. Seattle welcomed me with misty mornings and spectacular sunsets. My new apartment, a small one-bedroom with views of Puget Sound, became my sanctuary. I filled it with plants, art, and furniture, chosen specifically for this new chapter. Nothing came with me from my old life except my clothes, my professional portfolio, and a few cherished books. My new colleagues at Horizon Design embraced my contributions immediately. As the most recent hire from a major New York agency, I brought perspectives and techniques that complemented their Pacific Northwest aesthetic. Within 6 months, I was leading projects for the firm's most significant clients, my accident and recovery having done nothing to diminish my creative capabilities. In this new environment, I found myself writing as a form of therapy. Late at night, looking out at the twinkling lights across the Sound, I began documenting my experience first in private journals, then in anonymous blog posts. I wrote about family dynamics, about the courage required to establish boundaries, about the process of building chosen family when biological connections failed. To my surprise, these writings found an audience. Comments appeared from others experiencing similar struggles, seeking guidance and offering solidarity. What began as personal catharsis evolved into a community, a digital gathering of individuals reclaiming their narratives. You should consider publishing these more formally, suggested my new friend Alicia, a literary agent I had met through a local creative professionals networking group. Your story could help so many people. The idea was intimidating but compelling. I began organizing my writings into a more cohesive narrative, working on it during evenings and weekends. The process was painful at times, requiring me to revisit moments I would rather have forgotten, but also powerfully healing. Almost exactly 1 year after the accident, I received an email from Noah that broke through my defenses. Unlike previous messages pleading for contact, this one simply shared his own journey over the past year. He had indeed taken a gap year before medical school, working with a nonprofit serving underprivileged youth. The experience had transformed his perspective, helping him recognize the privilege that had shaped his life and outlook. He had moved out of our parents' home, supporting himself through part-time work while volunteering. "I don't expect a response," he wrote toward the end. "I just wanted you to know that your absence forced me to confront truths about our family I had been too comfortable to see before. Whatever you decide about our relationship going forward, I want to thank you for that gift, as painful as it was to receive." I read the email multiple times, sensing the authenticity behind his words. I still wasn't ready to respond, but I saved it in a different folder than the others, marking a distinction I wasn't yet prepared to examine closely. 2 weeks later, I met Jordan at a charity auction for the youth arts program, where he volunteered as a photography instructor. Tall, with kind eyes and an easy laugh, he bid against me for a vintage camera I wanted purely for its aesthetic appeal. "You clearly want it more than I do," he said, stepping back with a smile after my third aggressive bid increase. "I surrender." We ended up talking for hours after the auction concluded, finding common ground in our creative professions and shared appreciation for the arts. When he asked for my number, I hesitated only briefly before providing it, surprising myself with my readiness to consider new connections. Our relationship developed slowly, both of us carrying past experiences that counseled caution. Jordan had lost his wife to cancer 3 years earlier, and that grief had left its mark just as my family trauma had shaped me. Perhaps it was this mutual understanding of profound loss that allowed us to connect on a deeper level from the beginning. "I'm still figuring out who I am after everything," I admitted during our fifth date, a hike through Discovery Park that left us breathless and exhilarated. "Aren't we all?" he replied, taking my hand as we navigated a steep section of trail. "The interesting people, anyway." As autumn turned to winter, my manuscript took final shape and Alicia secured interest from several publishers. Jordan celebrated each milestone with me, reading drafts and offering perspective without trying to influence my narrative. One evening, curled on my couch watching the rain pattern my windows, Jordan asked about my family. "Do you think you'll ever reconnect with them?" The question didn't trigger the automatic defensiveness it once would have. Instead, I considered it thoughtfully. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Sometimes I think I've healed enough to engage without losing myself. Other times, I'm afraid opening that door would undo all the progress I've made." "What would make the difference?" he asked, his arm a comfortable weight across my shoulders. "Knowing they see me," I said after a long pause, "not as an appendage to Noah or an inconvenience or a duty, but as myself exactly as I am." "You deserve that," he said simply, "whether they can provide it or not." In that moment, I realized how far I had come. The validation I had sought my entire life from my parents now seemed less crucial than the self-knowledge I had developed in their absence. I was building a life based on my own values rather than reactions to their neglect, creating connections that nourished rather than depleted me. As winter gave way to spring, I found myself increasingly curious about the communications from my family that I had been archiving unread. One rainy Sunday, with Jordan's quiet support, I began reading through the accumulated messages, starting with the earliest from those first desperate days at the 2 years after the accident that nearly claimed my life but ultimately saved my soul. I stood in my Seattle apartment, surrounded by packed boxes. Jordan moved around the space efficiently, labeling containers and checking items off our meticulous list. We were moving in together, combining our lives in a charming craftsman house we had purchased in a leafy neighborhood north of the city. "Are you sure you want to bring all these?" he asked, gesturing to a box of letters and cards I had been sorting through. "They're part of my story," I replied, running my fingers over the familiar handwriting. "Not the whole story, but a chapter worth keeping." My book, Invisible Daughter, a Memoir of Becoming Visible, had been published 6 months earlier to unexpected commercial success and critical acclaim. What began as personal therapy had resonated with thousands of readers navigating their own complicated family dynamics. I had just returned from a 10-city book tour, speaking to packed rooms of people seeking both validation and guidance. The journey to this point had been neither straightforward nor easy. After that rainy Sunday, when I first read through my family's accumulated messages, I had spent months processing their words, consulting with my therapist, and gradually forming a response. Noah's communication stood out from our parents. Where they offered justifications and expressed hurt at my abandonment of them, Noah's letters showed genuine introspection and growth. His final email had simply said, "I understand if you never want to speak to me again, but I want you to know I see now what I couldn't see before. I'm sorry, Harper. You deserved better from all of us." 6 months after receiving that message, I finally replied with a brief email of my own. "I'm still figuring out what relationship, if any, I want with our family, but I'd like to hear more about your work with those kids." That exchange opened a tentative line of communication between us. Noah had indeed declined his medical school acceptance, choosing instead to pursue a master's in social work. He was now counseling families in crisis, helping parents recognize and address harmful patterns before they became entrenched. "Working with these families, I see our parents in so many of them," he wrote in one letter. "The way they hyper-focus on one child at the expense of another, the conditional love based on achievement. I keep thinking how different things might have been if someone had intervened when we were young." 3 months before my book's publication, Noah had asked if we could meet in person. We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop in Chicago, where neither of us had history or connections. Seeing him across the table, looking both familiar and strange, had been surreal. "You look good," he said awkwardly after our initial greeting. "Healthy." "I am," I confirmed, "in every way that matters." That first meeting lasted nearly 5 hours, both of us tentatively rebuilding a connection that had been buried under years of unbalanced family dynamics. Noah shared his realization that he too had been damaged by our parents' approach, his self-worth so tied to achievement that his identity collapsed when he stepped away from the predetermined path. "The hardest part was recognizing that I benefited from the same system that hurt you," he admitted. "I was complicit even when I didn't mean to be." "You were a child," I reminded him. "We both were." By the end of that meeting, we had established a fragile bridge between our separate lives. Not the close sibling relationship that might have been under different circumstances, but a respectful connection between two adults who shared both DNA and trauma. My relationship with our parents evolved more slowly and with clearer boundaries. After reading my book manuscript, which I had shared with them prior to publication as both courtesy and closure, they requested a meeting. Against the advice of several friends, I agreed with specific conditions: public location, limited duration, and Jordan's presence as support. We met at a restaurant near their hotel. The moment they walked in, I was struck by how much they had aged. My father's hair had gone completely white, and my mother's face showed new lines of stress or sadness. "Thank you for seeing us," my father began formally, as if addressing a business associate rather than his daughter. "We've read your book," my mother added. "It was difficult to see ourselves through your eyes." "It wasn't written to hurt you," I said carefully. "It was written to heal me." The conversation that followed was unlike any we had ever had. For perhaps the first time, they listened more than they spoke. They asked questions about my experience rather than centering their own. They expressed regret without expecting absolution. "We failed you," my father said at one point, his voice breaking. "I failed you. As a father, my job was to love you and make you feel valued. I didn't do that." "We can't change the past," my mother added, tears streaming unchecked down her face. "But we want to be in your future, however you'll allow us." I didn't offer forgiveness in that moment, nor did they explicitly ask for it. Instead, we established a framework for moving forward, a set of mutual expectations that respected my autonomy while leaving space for potential connection. In the 2 years since our relationship had been rebuilt on new foundations, regular phone calls with clear beginnings and endings, occasional visits with advanced planning and defined durations, they had met Jordan and, to their credit, treated him with genuine warmth and interest. Most significantly, they had attended my book launch in New York, sitting in the front row as I read passages describing their parental failures. Their willingness to bear public witness to their mistakes suggested a depth of change I hadn't thought possible. Now, as Jordan and I prepared for our new chapter together, I reflected on the extraordinary journey from that hospital bed to this moment. The accident that nearly killed me had instead catalyzed a rebirth. By losing the family I had desperately wanted, I had found the strength to create the life I truly needed. "Last box," Jordan announced, sealing it with packing tape. "Ready for the next adventure." I smiled, taking a final look around the apartment that had sheltered me through so much transformation. "More than ready." The phone rang, interrupting our moment. Jordan handed it to me with a questioning look. "It's your mom," I answered, exchanging pleasantries before getting to the purpose of her call. "Your father and I were wondering if you'd consider coming for Thanksgiving this year. Noah will be there, and he's bringing his new girlfriend. We thought maybe you and Jordan might join us. No pressure, of course." 2 years ago, such an invitation would have triggered a complex storm of hope, resentment, and anxiety. Now I could consider it on its own merits without the weight of unmet childhood needs. "Let me talk to Jordan and check our schedule," I replied. "I'll let you know next week." After ending the call, I turned to find Jordan watching me with a mix of curiosity and concern. "Thanksgiving invitation," I explained, "with the whole family." "What are you thinking?" he asked, knowing better than to assume. I considered the question seriously. "I'm thinking that I can visit them now without losing myself, that I can love them without needing them to be different than they are. That's real freedom, isn't it?" He pulled me into an embrace, his familiar warmth a constant in my transformed life. "That's the definition of it." Later that evening, I stood on my balcony for the last time watching the sun set over Puget Sound. I thought about the journey I would be sharing in a speaking engagement the following week and the message I hoped to convey to others still finding their way. I had learned that family isn't always those who share your blood, but those who make space for your true self. That sometimes the deepest wounds open doorways to the most authentic healing. That forgiveness isn't about excusing the past, but freeing yourself from its grip on your future. Most importantly, I had learned that becoming visible first requires seeing yourself clearly, valuing your own worth, even when others cannot or will not recognize it. If my story has resonated with you in any way, I'd love to hear about your own journey in the comments below. Have you ever had to establish boundaries with family to protect your well-being? What helped you find the courage to prioritize yourself? Please like this video if you found value in my experience, subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and healing, and share with someone who might need to know they're not alone. Thank you for witnessing my journey, and remember that your story matters too, exactly as it is, without editing or apology.